So we can begin. First of all, I want to say thank you so much to Judith for sharing her time and knowledge and trajectory with us.
It's my pleasure, and it's also an honor to be with you because I miss being in Brazil.
Yeah, we have a partner for a long time, since 2000, when Lalu took her doctorate review, and then 2004 I sandwich doctorate with you and Gregory King, Dr. Gregory. And then uh, I wish to introduce you to students and professors. First in Portuguese, and then we continue
Go ahead.
to talk in English. Okay?
Yeah? Okay.
Ok. Muito obrigada a todos que estão presentes, né? Muito obrigada a Amanda, que fez o esforço para a gente se comunicar pelo Teams, mas não foi possível. Obrigada, Vanessa, pela parceria de sempre, né? Estaremos aqui juntos. Muito obrigada às professoras, né, que estão conosco, da Lusa, Amanda, Daniela, Caroline. Muito obrigada. Obrigada aos estudantes que estão aqui conosco. E, bom, a professora Judith Green é uma notável e importante, uma professora emérita do Departamento de Educação do The Gervit School da University of California, em Santa Bárbara. Ela é membro fundadora da Santa Bárbara Classroom Discourse Group. Ela está aposentada na Lua Nativa, contribuindo com grupos de pesquisa que trabalham com fotografia e educação com os nossos grupos. Judith explora questões de pesquisa que abordam a questão social do conhecimento para dar suporte à equidade de acesso ao conhecimento a todos os. This is a very important learning we have from her. Now, I Judith to say words about the projector. She will want to say, and then after that we we introduce ourselves to you, especially people you don't know yet. Okay? So you have the word. The word is for you, Judith.
Okay. Boa tarde. My Portuguese is not very good anymore, so I will try to talk slowly in English. But my first time in Brazil was on a Fulbright in 1989, which was a decade before I met Mafa.
Yeah.
And it was in the south of Brazil.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got to come to Minas Gerais to meet Magda Becker Suarez, to have a conversation with people.
Yeah.
And then Magda and I were in Argentina together, and she invited me back to Minas. And then I met Lalu, and then she came. So for the last 3 decades, 30 years, I have been learning about Brazil. But I learned very quickly there's no one Portuguese. Okay?
Ok.
Bom dia. Bom
Bom dia.
dia. So but I grew up bilingual. I grew up learning my own language of my family, which was which was Yiddish, not even Hebrew. And that's Middle High German. And I went to school after school to learn that 3 days a week and on Sunday. So I went to 2 schools. I learned to read, to write, to speak in 2 languages at the same time, from right to left and left to right. But my teachers did not know. They didn't understand until I was in 6th grade. And in grade 6, my 6th grade teacher says to me, Green, because he was an ex-Marine sergeant, and he was in his first year of teaching, and he looked at me and said, do you know why you're in a middle group reading? And I went. So I went home. I practiced reading out loud because he told me the only thing I didn't do was to read out loud well. Okay? And the next day, I took a big book in and I read to him from an encyclopedia. And he put me in the top reading group. And he wrote that I was an advanced student when I went to junior high school. So I got changed. My whole life was changed by one question. That is a meta-discourse. What do people tell you about how to do the work, not what to say or do? Not how to decode it, but how to interpret the social. And I was always in the middle group, so I had people who were better than me and people that were the worse than me. But in 1979, there was an article written that captured that from Georgetown. And what they found was a boy who was very low reading sat next to the teacher as she worked with all of the good readers by the school definition. And in that moment, the teacher saw he could read silently, fluently. It was the observing of the action and understanding the history of the person that becomes a key, which is the intersection with the Vygotsky. And what is a challenge when we look across perspectives is to not just name the perspective, but when you give a name like, what's that word, Vanessa?
Sorry, what?
The big word for social, para something.
Social?
Yeah, from the Vygotsky frame.
The big word of
Yeah.
So you mean the zone of proximal development?
Perigivane?
Perigivane.
Perigivane.
Okay.
And it was in the Twinkle Twinkle paper.
Yes.
Yes. See, I've read some of the papers that
Yeah.
people have done, but I also just sent a video from an early dialogue with other Brazilian colleagues and one of my students and another professor, a male. So I think that the biggest problem with using a word like peravizania, did I get it right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes, yes, that's
Is
right.
that you need to tell the reader what it means, not just use it and assume they know. And that's one of the biggest problems right now internationally and nationally. When you report on your work and you use a term, but you don't help the reader understand. So I went to Google and I Googled it to see how it was being used. But this history I'm sharing with you, I share because I'm still trying to figure out the meaning of all the words I get, of all the theories that are being proposed, and how to understand those. So the 3 questions you sent me were very helpful, but they made me go back through my files to see how I've defined the concept. And the concept of video is one of the first ones you asked about.
Okay.
So I'm still a learner.
Yeah.
I'm only 84. I taught in inner city Los Angeles with Hispanic students, with black students, and including all the work in Brazil in different universities and different schools. The first day, one story from my first day in Brazil with my video camera. One of the people helped, the person who sponsored me had done her degree in Ohio. So then they invited me. The first time I didn't think it was real. The second time I went. And I got entry to classrooms, elementary school, in the South. I also was able to go on trains and do things to see different parts of Brazil. But this, going the first day with my video camera, I was used to having the teacher tell me where to put the camera. Because I worked with teachers who shared ideas with me, not that were people I didn't know. So this was the first time taking a camera in. So the camera was not a tool, it was a partner. Okay? Because it's physical, the children look at it. When I was in a kindergarten class in Ohio in my first year, a boy came up and said, "Oh, can I see what you're doing?" They would come look through my camera at their classroom. That was in kindergarten. But in 5th grade, the boy just took my camera and then looked at the girls. So the camera is not a tool, it's a partner in the classroom. And that's very important to understand, because how it gets perceived is very important to understand and to report on. How did you create what they call relationships? There's a whole movement in social psychology on relational positionalities. How do you position the camera? Who positions it? Who takes up the position of camera person? Because you get an angle on the classroom. You don't get the classroom. The camera, watch. Okay. So the camera's pointing depends on where you position yourself, where the camera's positioned. And much of our work early on and later talks about that. Whether you're in a high school class for art, or whether you're in a preschool class with young children, the camera is not invisible.
Yes.
Note taking is not invisible. One time when I went to a class and the teacher had us sit up above the class, and I took notes. This was in high school. The boys came to me and said, "Are you a police person?" And I said, "No, I'm taking notes on the teacher." And he says, "Oh, good. She needs it." So how you feedback, who you feedback with. In my earliest work with the video was to talk with the teachers in a first grade. And they said no one had ever talked to them about what they were doing. So how you create a partnership is a key piece of this. It's not just you get the right to do it because you're a researcher. It's how are you building that shared relationship? And that MAFA is available in the Green and Wallet book.
Yeah.
It's the Wallet and Green chapter in that talks about that and has the teachers' voices. So that helps. And those are both kindergarten or first grade.
Mm-hmm.
So they should be related to the levels you're working with. But no one had ever asked them. But that was in 1978. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And I will tell you that even now, a lot of people do not build that relationship or make it visible. And that's part of the whatever that word is.
Perejivani.
Perejivani. Thank you.
Perejivani.
Thank you, Vanessa. Perejivani. It's interesting because my family did speak Russian, but they didn't speak to me in Russian because their main language is Yiddish, which is Middle High German Jewish. And so this was all interesting because they were in Ukraine and they escaped under the Tsar to Paris, and then my mother came here. So I'm first generation. And that makes a big difference because I became aware of things that other people didn't. So who are you and how do you see the world is part of the process, not just what methods do you use.
Mm-hmm.
And with video, people call it data that you collect. We call it records. You make records from which you collect bits to create data sets. So it's not data, but it's a record you're making. And when Lalu came, she did that. She would videotape in the classroom, move the camera when she had to, and she'd take notes, written notes, because you can leave the camera on the stand and you can write in the notebook. But how you write is more what I'm learning Vanessa knows about because of Bill Corsaro. You can write running records, which we call field notes, and we do that by showing the time markers of what we're writing about. But you also have personal notes because you go, "Oh, she said that? Oh my gosh, I'm supposed to do that?" You have a personal response. You have theoretical notes, and you're going, "Oh, that's like Perejivani. Oh, is that a pattern here? Where do I have to look now?" So you're keeping a different kind of note. Okay? So you have field notes, you have theoretical notes, you have personal notes, and you develop theories from it. Okay? That's the intersection, whether you're in social anthropology or social psychology, or you're in doing it from a sociological point of view. I know this with Bill Corsaro because we had conversations like you and I are trying to have today. We invited him to Ohio State, but he also worked with John Gumpers, who was my mentor. And having the conversations with the theorist is a key piece of understanding their work. And I got lucky because Luis Paulo de Moita Lopez created an event for a group of us to go with Brazilians to a conference in Europe. And we met Vygotsky's daughter and her translator. So you get the picture of how you're interpreting their work. Is this how they meant it? Especially when you're reading journals, because journals do not give you the space to really write about the work you do. Which is why I love coming to Brazil, because we go out for lunch, we go out for coffee, we go do lots of things, and I have lots of pictures. Over 3 decades in different cities and different spaces. And then have had Brazilians come here to Santa Barbara.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, so I see it as a family.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
that, to me, is a very great honor to be part of. Because the work that I've seen from the first Lula election, when I was told that of every 500 children, 1,000 children, 500 failed first grade, I've had the opportunity to see the developing educational systems. And that brings me home, and I moved from, I grew up in California, although I was born in New York. I went to Berkeley for my doctorate, for my undergraduate in history, French, Russian, and English history with a minor in American. And then I taught for 10 years in inner city Los Angeles. And then I got mad and went back to graduate school because they took away all of the work we were doing in the 1960s to make standardized tests the norm. And that's why I went to Berkeley. And I got to work with the founder of early childhood here, one of the founding people, Millie Almy. Her first book, Piaget wrote the intro to, on young children's thinking. And then I got to work with John Gumpers, who was creating interactional sociolinguistics and ethnography of communication. And I worked with our government when we had an office, a National Institute of Education, which Reagan zero budgeted in the 80s. So I've had all these changes that keep me moving to working with alternatives, to seeing difference, to seeing the consequence. Now, with whatever that word is, say it again.
Perigivale.
Okay, does it take into consideration the political?
I don't think so. I think that's one of, Mafa may help me, but
Please
I don't
repeat the
think,
question, Vanessa. Please repeat the question. I couldn't hear.
I said does
se o
Perigivale...
Perigivale, I'm going to speak in Portuguese, okay, Judith? Just to translate
I'm
it.
used to that. Lalu and I used to code switch.
Yeah, exactly. Se o Vygotsky, no conceito de Perigivale, ele aborda as questões políticas ou de poder. Aí eu estou começando a responder que acredito que não. Diretamente, não. É claro que se você pensa no contexto mais amplo, sim. Mas não no conceito de Perigivale. Aí, se você quiser responder isso...
Oh, Vanessa. Hey, Judith. I think Perigivale is we can think about the relationship between person and environment as a unity, not separated
That's where I would.
concepts.
That's where I would.
They work together as an unity, and then when the environment change, the person change together, and both change each other. And then in classroom, we can think about the collective and individual interactions, how they change each other individual and collective.
Okay, that's once you enter the site, you can do that. But Margaret Mead in 1960, in her first talk at Harvard, when she came back to the U.S. Okay, you know who?
Sorry, Judith, who?
Margaret Mead.
Margaret Mead.
Gregory Bateson and Margaret Mead were family anthropology, cultural anthropology based. Margaret Mead said, the anthropologist needs to know the history. That's the first step. That's exactly what I believe. Before you go into individual collective, you have to understand the space, the history, how it came to be. When I came to Brazil one of the last times, Mafa took us to a preschool that was a municipal preschool. Yeah. We don't have municipal preschools. So the question was, how did it come to be available for children, for teachers? And then when I went into the preschool, we went from room to room to room and talked to people. I didn't ever see here the same pattern of physical space, of social space, of academic work, of interactional patterns. It was very different than the predefined boundaries here. And it was fascinating, and we got to talk to the teachers in each of the classrooms, in each of the spaces, or observe them, and to see how they were engaging. The how question is, for me, the big piece. How does this happen? How is it built? How is it created? Who creates it? For what reasons? In what ways? Under what conditions? The reason I asked about the political is that I have been in Brazil many times in times of political shift. And
Julie, these questions you are talking about, I am thinking about participant observation as a method from study, not as a technique, because when we think about this, how we are thinking about the process.
Okay.
And then how you explain participant observation in this process?
Okay, let me disagree with something or raise a question. In the new book that Lalu and I and Christina Kumpalainen and from Finland, who's now in Canada, and my friend Chrisanna Matmus in Ohio, who does participatory evaluation, are redefining all that. It is not method. It's a logic of inquiry.
Okay.
And how do you create that logic? What theoretical basis do you draw on? How do you bring it together to create the logic and to interpret, not find? You don't ever find or have findings. You have interpretations and you have warranted accounts according to the good friend James Heap. What's the basis of your interpretation is a key. And this is true with video. It's true with written records. Bill Corsaro talked about boiling it up and cooking it down. What he did with the field notes in the space were reductions, just notes about. They're not the phenomena. But he would go home afterwards and he would add from his head notes what he didn't write down in the class or in the observation. And he's one of the few people, because in my first book, which is open access, available to you, Bill Corsaro did the Entering the Child's World. And that meant how many different people did you have to talk to, how many different spaces were you in, how did you enter, and what did you learn from each? And then how did you do the work in the classroom? But it was, what was recorded was never the phenomena, he said. You record what you see and understand in your own language. Michael Agar calls that your language culture. Okay? But the people have a language culture of their own. And individuals have language cultures of their own. So how do these get built to being a collective knowledge as opposed to individual only? That's where they intersect. But what's missing out of a lot of the Vygotsky and early Russian work is the language, and is how to view language. And how do you view language? And now the concept of languaging is coming up. It's a big movement here in the US that we language the world. But we don't language it through one language necessarily. And you have different language cultures. And when we brought Michael Agar here to talk to us, he rethought language, culture, and ethnography after all of his work across sites to present to people from UFMG who participated, people from San Diego, and people from Ohio who participated with my community. So these are all pieces of a puzzle that you want to think about.
Mm-hmm.
How are you going to observe? Now, observing to me is the big problem from a definitional point of view, not from a personal point of view. If you think you're only doing one theory, by 1970, in the US context, there were 90 different systems of observation. I have that collection, 18 volumes. 1970, by 1974, there was a book that came out that showed out of 500 studies that were observational and systematic, no two people had the same. And they decided they needed to look at language. This was between the US and New Zealand, the authors. But now we know this, but it's a hard lesson to learn when you're doing your own work. So you're not making overstatements about this is the phenomenon. This is how I interpreted the phenomena is the key.
Uhum.
And that's the same thing. Do I see what the students see when it's a video and I go back? I don't know if you've seen the chapter that Lalu and I and Carol Dixon did, which has 5 classes for the same boy, one boy, in high school in Australia, but it was vocational. One in English, and we got to see how the teacher interacted with him, or rather with the whole class, not with him. How the math teacher engaged differently and talked to them and looked at the work and did the work. How does the teacher engage? Then we had to look at a cooking class. How did they learn to cook? Because it was a vocational school. And what do students have available? What was the language of cooking? Then we had to do a shop class where they were working on building something. None of us had ever done shop.
Uhum.
So I had to ask my brother to come and watch the video with us because he's a master craftsman in sheet metal. And he knew what the equipment was. He knew what the names of everything was. And we didn't. And then they had hospitality, and we knew that. So you had 5 different lingua cultures from the curriculum, the teacher, that the students had to engage with on one day. So when we go to an elementary school or a preschool, we see the whole day. When we go to a junior high, how many people here work in junior high? Anybody, or high school?
Quantas pessoas trabalham com educação infantil aqui, gente? E com
Ela está perguntando.
high
Não,
school,
ela está perguntando ensino fundamental.
ensino fundamental,
Ensino
high
fundamental
school.
e ensino médio.
Ah, high school.
Okay, because I've worked, Bia, who just went to University of Pennsylvania, and Terezinha worked in secondary, right? And they worked.
Yes,
Yeah, so I got to see how, with deaf children, Terezinha engaged with observing, but not just observing, engaging with, not on. Be careful how you think about the language you're using to describe your process. It becomes very important. But also, the most interesting thing in the new book is a chapter that Terezinha and Lalu and one of their students did, where Portuguese sign language was created by the local people. It was not formal Portuguese Sign Language, which they then had to learn. And the ethnographic base was to trace that development and the different sites in which it worked. Is that right, Terezinha?
yes. Like the community have their own sign language called Sena, and they created it because in the community there are lots of people. Is it a community in the north or in the state of the north of the country? The state called POE. In the south side of the POE, there is a community called Gepsa, and they are nowadays around 20 people, deaf people, in a very small community, and they use the oral sign language, the Sina sign language.
Yeah, but they had, as they moved in school, as they moved in business, as they moved in other things, you had these multiple languages coming together and having to relearn it at the community level, not just at the individual. That's true about education. In the 1960s, we had new math and new English. And the parents did not know new math and did not know new English. So how did the school district support the parents in learning the language or the new languages? They did the new math, but not the new English. But I was one of 40 teachers who got a fellowship to go to New York to Teachers College to learn about new languages and to learn about Black English and to bring that back to the school in a community setting. And we did parent nights. Same thing happened with changes in mathematics in the 1990s here. The teachers ran nights for parents learning the new language. The reason I say that is my father and brother used to have violent arguments about mathematics because my father didn't know the mathematics my brother was learning. These are all pieces of how do you build systems of understanding. The video becomes a base. When I was in the kindergarten or first grade, one of the boys' parents were psychologists, but he was absent. What do you think he said to me about the video? You have no idea? He said, "Can I see the video because I wasn't here and I'll know what the people were doing." Okay? It had nothing to do with his ability. It had to do with the opportunity he had. And this was in 1970s, he said that to me. So who gets to see the video? Who interprets it? And why? What's the reason for looking at it? So when you're trying to do it, the more transparent you can be, and that's the call right now. The issue is not showing and making visible something, it's transparency. And in the US context, they're part of the standards for reporting on your work. Transparency is making available to a reader who wasn't present how and in what ways and for what reasons you chose to do X in this way. And how, there are 4 things you know. How does your work support what others have done? How does it challenge what others have done? And how do you write about that? The third one is what's new? What did you learn that we don't know? Looking through those lenses, plurals. Okay? And what do you need to do next? I had to do that for my dissertation. In my dissertation, I was given permission to do analysis of 18 classrooms that had been part of a literacy project. They had videos. They gave me copies of the videos of the last time the teachers were given the books to have children read. And that was my dissertation, to show you how to analyze that. And then to compare it. After I finished that, I had to tell everybody, I had to go back and do it with another lens to contrast what I learned with what this other lens would give you. Okay, so these are pieces of the puzzle. The more you can contrast, not compare. Compare means you can know the whole phenomena. Contrast is how is it same and different. In what ways, under what conditions, and with what kind of understanding that's possible. And that's where I come back to video. Most videos are assumed to be the phenomena that was recorded. When you record, are you observing too? Do you make notes on things? Almost no one does. Vanessa? You do.
Definitely, it's a part of the process of analyzing, of doing everything. It's. I was just talking about this with Anna Julia, who's a student of ours, and she's gonna watch videos, and you have to take notes, exactly like I said, theoretical, methodological, personal notes, everything.
Well, I just did. I had the privilege of meeting with Douglas Barnes, who is a British scholar. Most people don't know his work.
Douglas
Barnes, Barnes.
Douglas Baker.
Huh?
Douglas Baker.
Barnes, Barnes. You're talking
okay.
about Doug
Barnes.
Baker, my friend.
Barnes.
When I was I used to visit my family in Paris in the 1960s. In 1969, he worked with two other people, and they wrote a book called The Language, the Learner, and the School. And when I visited London, I would go to bookstores. And I would go to the education part and take the books off the shelf and try and read some of it to see if it interested me. And I took home 40 pounds of books, one of which was Douglas Barnes. And then in the 1970s, he did a book called From Communication to Curriculum. And then he redid the communication book when Bruner changed his theory. I have a video of Bruner talking about the change he made in his theory. And by 1985, Barnes had went and reanalyzed all of his original records through that. So what you have in 2000, I met with Neil Mercer, and he talked to me about Douglas Barnes, and then they introduced me to him, so I got invited to lunch at his home. And I just found the video, because he is 98 now, and he wants to see the video that I did. I tried to send it the first time, but in the UK they didn't have the same players that we had in the US. So I have a transcript I made, and I read it in two ways. You want a strategy? One, I read it in the way I make transcripts. Not in columns, but in dialogue. Secondly, I had the AI people read it, and I listened to it. And it was much easier for me to follow the logic than reading it in print. But I've always had somebody read with me or read out loud, or I read out loud, so I can hear it as well as understand it in print. And I was just fascinated because I met with his wife and with Barnes, but Barnes had told me years ago that he didn't have a PhD. He worked with teachers, and he'd written books with teachers and on teachers and about his research. And in England, if you can show the parallel through your published work, you don't need a PhD to be a professor. So even at higher education. But meanwhile, that takes me back to the 1960s and to the thinking that led to what I do now. So think about, where did the ideas you have come from? Were they your personal experiences? Were your family's personal experiences? And when children come, what do they bring? So it's not just how many students are in the class, right? It's what's the background? What do they bring? What's their experience? What should I look at? And you can do that all the way through higher education. We have a dissertation that was made in architecture studio in higher education. And the professor wrote a note at the end about how much he learned from working with ethne. So think about your setting as a dual learning setting or a multiple learning setting. And how do you interpret it? And does that match the way they interpret it? And that's what Agar talked about. But see, the concepts you brought and what Mafa explained is important for a phase of the work, right? Part of the work, but how you come to it and how that then shapes what you see and how then you might add another one. How many of you wear glasses? Are your
I
glasses?
love
Do
I
your
love the
glasses have
bus.
multiple lenses? When you move
Lenses
your head
and
up
glasses.
and down, when you move your head up and down, do you see differently?
Yeah.
You don't. I do, because I have prisms in them, and they shape my eye and where it looks, as well as different lenses. Think about that as a metaphor for what you're trying to build. And what I know about the way the Brazilian thinking goes, it's more that way. So looking at Danusa and Daniela doing work across institutional boundaries in science and working with teachers coming to science, right? Very different. But then I got to talk to students, and that the students, how they were seeing these and how to come in. So how do you take that and build your programs of research? Does that make sense? So that came out of the question of what's a video. Think
Yeah.
about what's a video of. And how do you know what you're seeing? And what do you record and how do you record it? We never do transcripts in linear form. We put speakers side by side and trace the pattern. Linear transcripts assume that everything is just unfolding. No. So if you're doing a transcript, how do you build that transcription? And right now what I'm doing is looking at what AI is telling me in contrast to what we do. Because people are saying, oh, it's quicker to do it with AI. Of course, somebody programmed it. You're imposing somebody's logic, not your own. And that's a key piece of the puzzle. How do you lay out? And I will show you something. This is from my dissertation. This is an analysis of the literature and the work. The first column is the name of the article. The second column is the authors. Then you have a conceptual basis. What's the theories they're drawing on? Another column. And then you have assumptions that you're making. And you're unfolding this. Okay? Now I put it on a wall, and as we do the next one, we put it underneath so we can see and contrast. Okay? And my mother helped me. She took my notes and put them on cards. And then I could sort the cards. Okay? So these are pieces. Now this is only 4 decades old. It's still present. But you see...
And it still looks good.
Thank you. I have to transfer it to something that doesn't disintegrate. But let me see if I can find this. Okay. All right. I got a beta version of the new iPhone, so... Okay. Can you, whoops. You see that? That's a picture of how you read and gain from reading. The first thing is the perceived, but then what kind of knowledge do you bring to it? Language knowledge, local experiences. This is from Carl Fredrickson and Janet Donan, who Janet and I went to school together, and Carl was my best friend's advisor. And we've been friends for years, going back and forth on how to conceptualize what reading is. Not literacy. Literacy is bigger than reading. But from a psychological point of view, because Carl was one of the founders of cognitive development here in the US. And then he takes you from the perceived written text to the representative and propositional content. And then he takes you to constructed contextual information. Do you want me to send you this? Okay. I'll send it to Mafa and she can share it.
Okay, thank you.
But the key is, how do you graphically represent your work? Okay, that's a big key. How do you visualize part-whole relationships, unfolding themes, recurrent patterns? For us, with the video, how many days do we have to be to capture the lesson? 1 day? 1 hour? No. The teacher would say, tomorrow we will do X, and so we had to come back and capture the next phase. Now, the University of California has something called e-scholarship. Let me put that name in the chat room. Okay. Where can I do that? Okay, I want to write. How do I write? Oh, I'm having all these problems. E-scholarship is small e, big S, one word. It's open access to all dissertations from that 2018, except that I put 24 from the 1990s on there that show you the ethnographic base and different by different students at different levels of the institution. So you can go on to eScholarship, download their dissertation, and look at that whole process across levels of schooling and across angles. My work worked for 3 decades with one teacher, 10 years in her 5th grade classroom, 6th grade, then 5th grade. But pre-post English only. We had a vote against bilingual education in 1998. But we have all the records in her class, which Lalu was part of. Okay? Up to that point of 1998, and then we have 2 years after to show what was no longer possible. So teaching is not an individual act. Teaching is a professional act within a system. So when you're looking at a video, what information do you need? Now, when you look at the 5 classes, the article for the 5 classes we did with one child from Australia, we went and asked for more information because we didn't know vocational education. But I had been in Australia on a fellowship, and we had worked with the person who sent this to us to edit a special issue of a journal. And I still didn't understand the whole. So what do you need to record, document, and set up before you write about, or to write about the process, the phenomenon? It's not just what theory did you choose. It's what's the basis of your question. And I'm aware that Lalu has done that going back to her master's thesis, back to her hometown, but she's also followed up with students and found out that the churches wouldn't let them use technology, but they did build phones and things. So how do you understand what the children bring? How do you learn what it is? And it's a privilege for me to work with Brazilians because they're very insightful into all these changes. And it's a very different kind of academic world. But then my family is in France, and my cousins came to the United States to learn English. But I went in 1961, and my cousins took my dictionary away the first week I was there, because you have to learn the cultural knowledge, not just the words. That's the same if you're going into science. How many sciences are there? Stephen Toulmin, the philosopher, says there's no such thing as, what was it? So, there's no one science, only sciences. How many of you do science? Okay. How many sciences do you have to look at every day? Which ones do you draw on? Is chemistry the same as biology? Do you see, these are the processes of learning the lingua cultures and the processes and the I can't even pronounce it.
Yeah. Judith, I think we have a big challenge when we get in classrooms because the languages of classroom and the language in the classroom, we have to understand, we have to comprehend
Right.
together the participants.
You just made an important distinction. The languages of the classroom and that's plural, and language in the classroom. In a moment, or an event, or another event, are they all the same? And that's when the young children in the preschool are engaging across settings, sites, and things. That was purposely done in the municipal school. But in each classroom, the patterns were different. And what's the language of those patterns? And what brought that about? But a lot of people do only one time. That's what happened with the 90 systems that didn't agree. If you have two people in the same classroom, you're going to have two different sets of notes. Have you ever done that? Gone in with someone else and recorded and see what you see, what they did, and what they see? That's a great exercise. I sent 3 people in to take notes. No 2 came out with the same notes. Do you see, if you're going to be trusted, you have to make it transparent. And you have to be able to articulate those phases and the links. So if you want to see with bilingual children, on the eScholarship site, Leanne Putney, Putney, her dissertation goes from the first day, and then one child left for 3 months, came back, and the challenges that child faced until she became a leader again. But she had to go home to Mexico and then come back to California. But she had been the leader of the girls in Spanish on being a student. And then she didn't know what had happened until they started something new. And then she took up her old position. So when you're trying to look at social, when you're trying to look at intellectual, when you're trying to look at these other things, how are you creating the understanding of that? When it occurred, in what way, what preceded it, what followed it? These are all elements. Sorry. Somebody want to say something? Am I driving you all crazy? Are there questions that you would like me to address?
Gente, alguma questão, por favor, aproveitem. Bárbara.
I think, Judy, that you're addressing a lot of interesting and important questions. Because when you're talking about videos, what we have recorded, how, why, when, under what conditions, and so on and so forth, it's essential for us because that's what we are doing now. We have a data set of 900 hours of these infants and toddlers in the same classroom throughout 3 years. Mm-hmm. And we are going back to these videos to analyze them and to trying to get a better sense of the history of such events. But it is quite different from junior high or elementary school because the languages are different.
Yeah, but to some degree, when you think about language, let me show you something, okay? Let me share this. I was redoing it. This is what the AI generated. That's not what I generated. This is what I generated. So each of the sites you have on video, how many hours?
900.
And how many classrooms?
One.
The same
We followed the same classroom, the same children, since they were 10 months old until they were 2.5.
Okay. So you have a timeline.
Yes, exactly. Until 2, 3. Some of them were 3. You can put it 3 years old. Yeah.
And you have 900 hours. So do you have a picture of how many hours for each year?
Yes, it's around 250, 300 each year.
Okay, do you have a timeline of dates?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just asking because that's what I would need. Okay, so you can anchor that.
Exactly. That's the challenge.
Okay, we'll watch. This is the person who's done the most graphic in our work is named Doug Baker.
Yes, he's very good with those graphic elements.
Yeah, but the key with Doug's work is the swing out charts, which anchor. Okay. So there is a book that is open access I'm going to recommend. This is a major offering from the Spencer Foundation, funding it, but it's the Handbook of Cultural Foundations of Learning. Okay? And this is open access. You can download this whole book for free. It's Naila Nasir, who is the president of the Spencer Foundation.
Okay.
And Carol Lee, Roy P., and Maxine McKinney de Royston. But the key with all of that, okay. Oh, I must have done something weird to my computer. It's driving me crazy. Okay, so this is part of a positioning theory. There's a new handbook, handbook that just came out on positioning theory because the social psych world is now taking up positioning theory. And one of the ways, yeah, come on, go away. You can situate things is in what we call swing out charts. Oh shoot, they're not here. Okay. The swing out, is an idea that swing out. They're forms of mapping. Okay, so this was a swing out here. It has the dates across. But which one are you going to go in depth into?
We can't see, we are still seeing the Word document.
Oh, okay, stop share. Thank you. Let me do share. Okay, chat, react, share. Okay. See?
Yes, they are wonderful. Yeah, I love that.
And you can put conceptual themes down here. You can put anything you want. Doug put the number of years the teacher was there because she had 29 years experience, and then he located which column, which point he worked with her. But this is the swing out. From this moment, so you're not losing the whole. But from this moment, I'm going to go in and look at the key events in the museum project, okay? And you can see these are the dates. So if I want to look at a cycle, I can put the cycle here. If I then want to, does that help? Visualizing these.
Yes, it's essential to visualize it.
Yeah.
And to better understand, to create theory, everything, it helps.
Because you're looking at where in time and when in time you were able to understand this. Not from the first moments, but what in the first moments did you see, right?
And it helps to bring the relationship, part, raw, whole, together. So you can see the whole thing and then what you're analyzing, but you don't lose the sight of the whole. So
Right.
that's very nice.
It's no, that's not going to work. Okay, so we did a article for the Review of Research and Education that does a contrast between Greg Kelly's work and Doug Baker's work. So here's a phenomena to explain, what is this? To explore, to understand how language functions in the classroom. So examining the effects of the situation and context on human speech and performance, which is what you were talking about, some of you. And examining the situation context on language use. Okay, I'm going to change the angle. Okay. Then you have identifying ways to assess abilities of the young child, identifying and delineating social factors, exploring the conditions in which formality of a situation influences the observed performance. After day one, students bring expectations, right? Identifying the social context of situation, identifying the social context of interactions. Those are different. Social context may be they thought of as the immediate environment or as a more dynamic level of situation. But then we're dealing with conceptual issues, and this guides our work. looking at participation structures, looking at whole group patterns, small group patterns, individual interactions. See, if you come up with these as a common frame, as you go across your 900 hours, you're going to get variation, but that's good. But what are the cues you're using to say this ties to this? And, okay, so constructive constructs defining the interaction. Now, I'll show you. Whoops. This is Kelly, and Kelly is a science educator that I know, Danusa knows, and others know. So how students form self-selected teams. That's the social fabric in a different way. Not of the teacher talk, but of how did each team interpret the task. Because when Greg invited me to work with several people, we analyzed 4 different groups of students on the same task he was teaching with a computer base. And we saw that not only did they not agree at the group level, but the dialogue between the children, the boys and the girls at the high school level, dismissed some of them socially. So we looked at all these different levels. And then the ways in which teams engaged in the technology was one of the questions. But then, here's Greg's follow-up. You needed to construct multiple forms of transcripts to map and thus create texts, which were then analyzed to seek evidence of how the developing task and events identified were being constructed by different groups in order, so you can lay out some of these common principles, tracing students' interactions, actions, and discourse to examine how and under what conditions and in what ways the students proposed and thus displayed or not. There's always the possibility of not. Understandings of scientific knowledge and an epistemic process. Now, this is a key that we're talking about. It's your epistemology, your ways of knowing. And what most people call methods are epistemological processes, ways of doing the work through certain lenses. Okay, and then engaging in the contrastive analysis across the groups that require different forms of representation. We don't talk about representation. Through these lenses, we represent what we learned, not represent, which is a noun. Okay, getting to process. Now, that led to developing theoretical understandings of what constituted common knowledge across the groups, which is Neil Mercer's argument, as well as individual student knowledge and collective knowledge within the group. Okay, and then here's another way of mapping it. This is all 4 groups doing exactly the same thing, but look at how sorry. They differed. So group 1, group 2, group 3. Even the beginning. One was an introduction, the other one was setting up the equipment and the students arriving. This is the timeline. Okay, and you can see how much on what time was spent and who spent that time. Then Greg, did this. The sequences of interpretation of meaning of constant velocity and visual symbolic forms. So one column is the line number from the transcript. Okay? Next is the actor. Next is the talk, and he uses the constructs that we built for the micro-ethnographic work, which this book, the book that he and I did, is also open access, and the most recent transcription format is in the back, is an appendix, and it's Kelly and Green on sociocultural. I want you to think about the difference between sociocultural and discourse, and also how you think about the intersections of the Vygotsky and the other, because sociocultural theorists don't deal with discourse for the most part. Then he did the nonverbals, and he looked at the reference of the different students. Now, that's one way of transcribing. Then he did, this is Doug Baker's Swing Out. This is the life history of the class timeline of intergenerational studio art. Okay? The teacher had 29 years. From this year to this year, there were 5% of students who entered for the first time. But in this year, 12% of the students were new. In this year, the years he was observing, the 2 years, 35% of the students were new the first year he was there, because it was a program. And by the fourth year, 53% of the students were new. Are all your students in the years you've looked at the same student body? No new people came in. Well, I'm seeing head yes from Moffat. New people came in? You could look at the number of students who were present in each day. Were they the same? Or were they different? But here what he did was take this year to show his analysis. And this was academic year 1 and academic year 2. And here's the video. This is the first reference to the video. You can do the video time. These were the records of the phases. Preparing the talk to researchers, teacher explaining, letters from the students to the student group, and then he had a running record of the events. There were 79 analytic lines he did. Okay? That makes it transparent to what the base is. But now here, this was the teacher, but the teacher initiates codes of friendly sharing, which is what he's going to focus on. Not everything she said, but what she was dealing with. And these are from the video. These are the phases of the actions, and this is the focus. Now, that led to the selection of 2 students to follow. James entered on the first day, but Maya missed the first month. Do you see? When you have an absent child, you have an exciting period. How was that child brought back into the whole? What was the phase of that activity? What did they need to know to participate, right? It's like the boy I told you in the kindergarten that said he wanted to see the video so he knew what would go on when he was absent. But that one piece helps you say, so how was he reintegrated? Okay? So now, those are the primary types of visualization that can be done. David Bloom and Greg both do pictures of the children. Susan Bridget, who does dental in Hong Kong, but she's from Australia, and she does the interactional ethnographic work, did the same analysis. This book, which is not open access but is an e-publication, will give you a lot of those different graphic representations. And it does it all the way through different countries, including Lithuania. Now, our new handbook will be even more in terms of that, because Ana Inez reported on Argentina that ethnography was brought to Argentina by two teachers in 1920 and 1930, two sisters.
Sorry, Judith. We couldn't see the book because we're seeing Lola new screen.
Can you see it now?
You're sharing this screen, yeah. Yeah, now it's... Thank you.
Aldra did the picture she lives in the Florida Everglades, and she took the picture. The picture's a metaphor. Which is the real tree, and which is the water picture of the tree. So that's what you're trying to show, the difference. But this is called Interaction Ethnography, Designing and Conducting Discourse-Based Ethnographic Research, and it's a Routledge book, but it is an e-book. I would love to be able to make it open access, but it will cost about $6,000 now. So, I don't have a university paying for anything.
That's, I think, very important what you are saying and showing us, because it means you have to understand how this relationship between whole and part in class, between in classroom or activity classroom, and then I think make transparent this process. We have to show this relationship between parts and whole, I think.
So this is another way. This is James Spradley. Shared cultural knowledge to ethnographic description. He generates it through cultural behavior, cultural artifacts, and speech messages, which gets observed and then reported. But he also does a table. See, he defines it this way. You can make the steps visual like this. Does that make sense? Can you see that?
We can't see.
I know, I keep doing that.
That's quite all right.
Okay, so here's Spradley.
We can see, yeah.
Define the research problem, formulate the hypotheses. But now, what's interesting is hypotheses come up. That's the other thing Corsaro talked about. As you're going through, the hypotheses get raised. So where did a new hypothesis come in? But these are all the steps in terms of operational definitions, which is what we've been talking about for transparency. And the design of research instrument. So your process is an instrument, not a method. To gather data, we would change it to gather records. To analyze or construct data in order to analyze it as data. Draw conclusions and report. That's his statement. But he takes you through cycles involved. And he defines the steps. But he looks at macro and micro ethnography. But in 1979, I was asked by the publisher to review this book, if it was worthwhile for education. He died in 1982, but the book was just re-released in 2004, I think, or 17, because you're talking about social units of complex societies, multiple communities, single community, different kinds of things, so you can situate your work. But this is what he says: you start by getting a broad description. Then you go more focused. And then you can do selective. See, with your 900 hours, you could take a theme and trace it through that way. Now, in this case, he identifies the objectives to understand the role of social situations in beginning participation observation, to identify criteria for selecting the best social situation for participant observation. So out of all the possible ways you guys could look at those videos, do you have subgroups looking at different dimensions? Or do you all look at the same thing in the same way?
No, each student has her own project, her own dimension, feeding, leading, literacy practices, imitation, and so on and so forth. Each one has a focus, numeracy.
So maybe that's the map you do first. You take
yes.
a map out. Here are the students, here's the people in the project. Here's the students, here's their background. This is going to be what we do next, I'll show you. And he says to locate several possible social situations for doing ethnographic research. And for him, a situation has actors, activity, and place, but there's a social situation that you define. Now, he entered a playground. Okay? But when you entered the playground, how many different spaces did you have? So he had one with swings, he had one with sidewalk, he had one with embankment, and he had one with the playground bench, and then he had the place of the playground as all of these things. But who was there? And who went to each one of those? So that's what he was trying to look at by talking about the place, the activity. And you have different departments, different people, different physical things. So I found this one answered questions that my education at Berkeley never answered, even as a graduate student. So, whoops, go back one. You talk about wide angle lenses you take, or introspections, or insider, outsider. You see the kinds of actions you're recording too? The record keeping, the non-participation, passive participation. Here he has degree of involvement. From types of participation: complex, active, moderate, passive, non-participation. Were any of you in the site doing the video recording and other things?
The students that are now in our project, they have not been in the site.
Okay, so
but the first students were.
So now the first question I have is, how, in your own mind, are you entering the site?
Well, that's the question.
Right.
We do need to analyze and think about it, how you enter a data set that was produced through ethnography, but while you are watching the videos, what are you doing? How? What records you are doing? How do you find an anchor event? So that's all of those questions.
That's important, but you see, if you start to document and write a chapter on that, put it together as a guidebook, then it helps other people see. But here he's telling you, consider for the moment the language variations that became visible, part of his ethnographic record. Okay? And this was of studying tramps, people on the street. The investigator's native language. And he wrote, many of my field notes were written in the ordinary language I use everyday situations. Obviously, this included meanings drawn from as far back as my childhood. Isn't that nice? Then he says the language of social science. Other entries in my field notes came from the more abstract language of social science that I've learned as a professional anthropologist. Then he's saying the language of tramps. I recorded what tramps said in court during informal conversations in the treatment center and during the interviews. The courtroom languages. So you could, wait a minute, from this model, you would have the model when they entered, the language of entry, the language of the teacher organizing, the language of, do you see? And then you could do it from the different angles of the students. And then you have here the languages of alcoholism treatment. But kinds of field notes he did. Condensed accounts. You have, come on, go away. Expanded accounts. That's like Corsaro's notion of cooking it up and boiling that. You have boiled down notes the first time and then you cook it up with what you have in mind. Okay, so he now says, the task is set up a fieldwork notebook with a file with a section on condensed accounts, expanded accounts, a journal, but you could list those and you get descriptive observations, focused observations, selective observations. He takes a grand tour, but this is the key. He gives you the areas. What are all the spaces and places? Who are all the actors? What is the activity? The set of related acts people do. Objects, the physical things that are present. The event, a set of related activities that people carry out or create. The goal. Now, this gets translated into this. So, all this, what are the space, the objects, the acts, the activity, the event, the time, the actor, the goal, and the feeling. Whoops. If you put that across the top, then you're going to get down this angle here, you'll get what are all the spaces, right? But you're going to look at space by object, space by act, space by activity. This is the domain analysis. This is, to me, what will give you a big picture of the evolving, developing spaces, times, activities, language, whatever you want to put in. Okay? So he says to understand the nature of ethnographic analyses, to understand the nature of cultural domains, okay, to identify the steps in making a domain analysis, and to carry out systematic domain analyses, he gives you a whole framework. X is a place for Y, X is an actor in Y, X is a reason for Y, okay? But he gives you these drawings. So here's a domain. Domain is a friend. X is a kind of friend. Personal enemy, ritual friend. So included terms, you have all these different domains, and there's a macro level he does with this. But you can look at maneuver, you can look at parent, you can look at runner. But this is his model that I find the most informative. He was the first to visualize this for me. That was back in '79 when the book came out in '80. Okay, so here's a category called strict inclusion. X is a kind of Y. So whatever you put in here is about an expert witness, or whatever you want to put there. Spatial, X is a place for Y. X is a part of Y. You see, you're dealing with all those field bases and things. Cause and effect, X is a result of Y. X is a reason for Y. X is a place for doing Y, location of action. X is used for Y. X is a way to do Y. X is a step in Y. X is an attribution of Y. So these are worksheets that allow you to build a common logic in uncommon ways. Here. This is the way he graphically gets to that. Okay? Semantic relationship. That's what he calls them. Strict inclusion is what he's looking at. From, X is a kind of Y. An example is an oak is a kind of tree. You could say raising your hand is a kind of practice you learn. Okay? And he does it this way by included terms. So all the language that you observe and all the different actions you observe or record can go here, but it gets to be is a kind of Y, is a kind of, and then he calls it a cover term. Does that make sense? If you did something similar across the different classrooms, you're using a common logic in uncommon sites. And you would have that list. Now here, finding privacy, controlling temperature, and getting sleep, he says, is a kind of problem. It's not just physical space. Do you see how you can build that? Here's the same thing. Means ends. X is a way to do Y. Reviewing notes is a way to study. Or to make an interpretation. But the included terms were pull the curtain, go to the walk, go to the TV lounge, order the private room. These are all ways in finding privacy. This one is in terms of a kind of person. You could have a different kind of student, right? A nurse, a patient, a doctor, a visitor. So you're beginning to pull it from. He says here, this one ties to some of what you're thinking about. Developmental research sequence, ways to listen, ways kids teach each other, ways to have fun, ways to dress, ways to get parents to hurry up. You see, X is a part of Y, gives you different ways of representing. That's what we talked about, right? Representing, not representing. So now he did it through preparing domain analysis worksheet, giving samples of field note entries. searching for possible cover terms and included terms that are appropriate to fit the semantic relationship, repeating, okay? And then here's his process for writing ethnography. Start with selecting the social situation, doing participant observation, making ethnographic record, making descriptive observations, make a domain analysis. All of these lead to the writing of an ethnography. But see, if you visualize it this way, each of the people in your group would have different different definitions that go with those common areas. And here he has a whole thing on strict inclusion. X is a kind of Y. He says kind of acts, place, objects, activities, relationships. You could do interpersonal relationships, social relationships. You could do all kinds of things. Events were activities, places, events, and objects which tie to the social nature of it. Kinds of time, kinds of actors, kinds of feeling. But he has all the way down, gives you the sub areas for each of the domains that he was looking at. He was looking at everyday spaces, not classrooms. Okay? Look at this. Stages. Entering a store, entering the video. Day one. Student entering the video, okay? Selecting something, a shopping cart. You see, he just calls them different stages, which is not a common term in research, but should be for the kind of work you're doing. And I love this, look. Descriptive observations, focused observations, and selective. You can graph them in different ways. And he gave 4 examples, suggestions that may help you plan for making focused observations. Here's how you're getting, you reverse the pattern. So once you've identified the phenomena you're looking at, you can look at the elements. There are kinds of different. And then you can divide those into parts. We do this all the time. Okay, do you see the part-whole relationships being represented in the work done? Part of a tuna boat. Could be part of a day in the class, right? And then these are the different spaces, subspaces, and each one represents a different dimension, each column. Okay, to the left. This is called a taxonomic analysis. So each stage has creates a taxonomy of elements you want. And that's what he's done the diagrams of. You can do it in different ways. And this is things that are required, and these are the different tasks you have to do. And the components. Junk mail, signed, action, feeling. You can get to emotion, you don't just have to do physical. Does this make sense? I can share this so that you know, because it is...
I have already shared with everybody.
Okay.
We have a PDF copy.
So have you come to a conclusion on some of the common things you want done?
What do you mean exactly? Because we do have
common processes that you want used as well as uncommon ones.
well, each student has her own way of doing or representing, constructing map events, going through the videos. That's what we are trying to write about.
Okay, but
What the students are doing, how the difference and commonalities.
Okay, but what have you learned from those differences? Just that? That's why I'm suggesting that you might have some common questions for now looking across those.
Exactly.
And that Spradley might give you some structures or ways of that look structural but aren't. They're situated.
It's a good way to begin and to start from.
Right. So you might might want to go through 10 of them. Not all. How many people do you have?
Well, we had around 15, maybe. I don't know exactly, but around 15.
Yeah,
15 students.
My dissertation I had 18 videos from a program that was 3 years in the making in the schools on reading comprehension. But I got the last day. So how did I choose it? How did my advisor choose that one for me to use? What could I see? How could I analyze it? Those are the kinds of things that become a key if you're writing about it. So these are just ways of, since you have this, left. Here's a way you could do, he gives you things, kinds of people. So what kinds of students? Boys, girls? Who are the other kinds of people in the class? In my kindergarten classes, we had teacher aides and teachers looking at different things. So these are just, you can make a list that you want to look at in common, because these aren't predefined. They're just examples. And then as you start to do the contrast for days that they looked at, right? Could all do day one. And what led you to focusing on different dimensions, right? Or did you all focus on the same thing?
Different dimensions.
Right. That's what the person would have to explain, was why choose that particular phenomenon. Does this make sense?
Yes, definitely.
So now here.
Yeah.
Huh? Just another graphic of the different spaces, but it could be different phenomena of study, right? So the key with video analysis of the kind you're doing is to, everybody's going to come out with something different, but then why how did those get chosen? Not why they were chosen only, but how. How did you decide? So Kelly, if you were doing it, what did you focus on?
What is?
What's your
I
analysis?
think Yellow is going.
No, I'm here.
Oh,
She's there. It's somebody I can see that I don't know. I now know.
and
Well, on my research, I had focus on literacy practice.
And how did you define literacy?
I let, can I speak in Portuguese and someone translate because I
Oh,
don't
yeah.
know how to make myself.
That's fine.
Bom, eu deixei que o campo me dissesse o que era letramento. O que as pessoas no grupo dissessem através das práticas, das interações.
She's saying that she let the people from the side, infants, toddlers, and teachers, tell her, inform her what literacy was about, what literacy was.
So how did you do that? Were you present in the site, or were you just watching the video?
I was present just for a moment, about 1 month and a half in 2020, and then I watched the 3 years video recorded.
So if I take Brian Street and Shirley Bryce Heath's definition, I get a different picture of literacy than if I take some of my colleagues.
but
Because
Judith,
literacies, it's literacies, plural, not literacy.
yeah,
Yes.
but we use the definition from Brian Street of literacies, and we contrast with what Tans wanted as literacy for the participants of.
Okay, the key is that Brian's argument in 1984, and he did it with literacies and numeracies, is that it is an ideological stance, not an, right? And so you're talking about when you use it, you need to define it as ideological, taking an ideological perspective. I'm looking at what ideology is about using text. Shirley Bryce Heath argues that whenever a printed text is involved, it's literacy. She did that in 1982. These are pieces of the puzzle that you want to define, that anchor. It's not a phonics program. It's not skill, which is the autonomous skill model. It's the ideological perspective, that it's being developed, what it means, what texts mean, how they're worked with. Do you see? That's a key piece of what I'm suggesting. At that level, when you choose the phenomena, who's guiding your choice, or what theories are you drawing on to define literacy, especially in changing, what is being called changing landscapes right now. We call them changing terrains. The politics create the changing terrains. But what was made available to students through an ideological stance, were they not given autonomous skill models?
No, we agree with you. when
You
we
may
talk
agree with
about
me. All I'm
literacy.
suggesting is you need to articulate those in print.
Yeah.
They need to be made more explicit. That's when I asked you the question about that whatever it is.
Cool.
I can recognize it. I just can't pronounce it. Yeah. So when you're dealing with that, you want to have like Spradley did, the context, how you're using it, not just that it is.
Okay. I think, Jude, our challenge is how we can use the structure of Spradley to create logic of inquiry in our researchers.
Well,
To
me that's easy, because that's where the swing out charts came. Everything was showing X is a kind of Y, X is a timeline, these are the kinds of things we're looking at. So when I'm looking at literacies, X is a kind of literacy process, X is a kind of literacy practice. A practice grows up over time, whereas a process is what I'm observing, right?
Yeah.
From an anthropological point of view, that's a distinct difference. X is a way of doing Y. So if I'm dealing with literacies, what are the ways that the children are engaging in Y, right?
Okay.
So you can begin to build your own taxonomy across those times, because you're giving 16 students the right to do different dimensions on the same records. But where's the intersections? And the one thing I can do is draw you a picture of something. Let's see. Okay, so.
Okay, Judith. We have to finish our conversation, our lovely conversation, because people have to go out. And Lola is with us. And I have to say thank you so much for your contribution, for your time, for everything we teach us.
I hope it was useful.
Someone?
Most definitely. So I just want to say thank you. And in a Thanksgiving Day, so we are very grateful. And we have to thank you.
It just gave me something to be thankful for.
Well, I'm thankful.
But I'm also available if anybody wants to show me things, to talk to me.
That would be great.
Yeah, I'm more than happy to do that.
Yes, we can continue our conversation.
Yeah, another time. Yeah.
Yeah, I just the key to me is a simple model, which most people don't deal with. Okay.
Thank you so much. You can send to us the recording, please.
No, I'm okay. I will do that.
After
the key here,
you download this.
Okay.
Ok.
I'll draw. That's what it is.
Gente, muito obrigada, viu, por vocês estarem aqui.
If you think about, just let me end
Okay.
the thought. If you think about this as the teacher or the person or the investigator, and that's it, what you're observing, this is what you're recording about. Because you bring your own history and thinking. This person brings it. Okay? Then, if you understand that there's a group, always a group, we can number these cells as 1, 2, 3. This is the group. And you can now do 4, 5, 6. So you can look at group and individual, or from this individual. And then if I want to do another thing or outside, let me just do one thing I'll show you. And then I know you have to go. Delete. Okay. I can't draw on those things. But But what you're doing is amazing and very, very, very important. So, okay, just to show you, how do you conceptualize a relationship and the people in there? So this is phases of my own work with different actors, different people, but this sociolinguistic was the teacher, the student, and the material leading to a communicative event. But then the next phase said, wait a minute, it's never one child. So we put in group. The material, the group, the student, and the teacher. Oh, but then it's embedded in decisions from outside. And this is the moment I'm looking at. But we were looking at the home, society, the state, the nation, the world, the district, the classroom, the school. But our new model is that all of these things are present in the moment, but not are always visible. So that's why the dotted lines. The 4 dimensions are always the center. But then I can look at teacher-student interactions, I can look at teacher-material interactions, I can look at material-group interactions, I can look at teacher-student group interactions. This is called set theory in mathematics. And you can deal with your axis of development, which is really how you're developing these things over time. So these are phases of my own learning, not from the very beginnings of my graduate work and my teaching, because I taught for 10 years in inner city, and how the models were visible and what the model looked like for the moments of interaction that I was looking at. Because when you get here, any particular moment has a home community background, school board or whatever, in the US Congress and national groups, school districts. So these are all backstories, or those histories. So how do you graphically represent that? And then tracing from time 1 to time 2 to time 3, it's not just reducing it to one report, it's phases of your work. And that's where axis of development comes in. And I can send you that work on what constitutes an axis of development. That's where Melinda Kalanoff and Mona Lisa Chan from our group, the students who worked with us, created that on how to document your process. And that's the key, that what you're doing, which is amazing. I mean, okay, that's easy.
I really have to go now.
Okay.
I'm so sorry.
No, I
But-
understand. I
I
was
just want...
late and all that jazz.
No, you were not late. It's just
Ah,
mixed up
here.
time zone confusion.
Okay, this is what you might want to do. It's an axis of development in which each phase leads to a new phase, but here's the ways of thinking about it. And I'll send this to you. It's
Please do.
the two of them have
Okay.